Simon Says subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications.
When most of us are asked to put together a spreadsheet, we tend to dive into this task without giving too much thought to the design or the structure. And whilst the result of simply just entering in data into a spreadsheet without thinking too much about it might be sufficient for the task at hand, and your manager might be completely happy with the spreadsheet that you've produced, it can cause problems further down the line if you haven't really thought about how you're designing it. For example, if you spent a long time working on a spreadsheet and you haven't protected it in any way, when you share that with other people, when it comes back around to you, you might find that you have lots of errors in that spreadsheet, or maybe formulas that you didn't intend to be changed have been changed. Or maybe you're getting lots of questions from your colleagues about where they should enter their data, what type of calculations they should be using, which can become very time consuming. Or maybe when you originally set up this spreadsheet, you didn't really think about the future. So in 6 months' time, when you come back to that spreadsheet and you need to make changes to it, you find that you're really having to spend a lot of time modifying different formulas in different cells, as opposed to just being able to update one figure and have everything else in the spreadsheet automatically update. So it's things like this that we really do need to think about at the design stage. So what I've done here is I've put together some golden rules of spreadsheet design that would be very helpful to think about before you get too far into the creation process. So let's take a look at them. Number 1, adopt a standard and implement it. So this relates to adopting a consistent convention when it comes to things like cell formatting, fonts, colors, and file names. It might be that you work at an organization that has branded colors, and so the colors that you're using in your spreadsheet need to be from a specific palette. Whatever colors you choose to use, make sure that they are appropriate for the type of spreadsheet that you're putting together. They add to the data and don't distract. And you use color consistently across your spreadsheet, and it doesn't end up looking like a rainbow. Also, when it comes to fonts, make sure that you're using a font that's easy to read. Arial font, Calibri font, those are always great examples of font that works well in Excel. Stay away from some of the fancier font, which again is really going to distract from your data and make it difficult for other people to read. Put things like large data sets into tables so that they look organized, and use borders and background fills to highlight certain pieces of data. Even when you're thinking about naming your spreadsheets, try and implement a consistent file naming convention. If the spreadsheet relates to an invoice, maybe think about using a prefix in the file name like INV and then maybe the date. If it's a report, maybe use a prefix like RPT, so immediately if you're looking at your files in File Explorer, you have a rough idea as to what's contained within that spreadsheet. All of these things really help you adopt a consistent standard. Number 2, try and ensure there is an appropriate level of knowledge and competence within your team. If you have top-notch Excel skills and it's your job to put together the majority of the spreadsheets, but you're sharing those spreadsheets with colleagues who have very basic Excel skills, that can cause problems. So it's a really good idea to make sure that the people within your team have not only had the sufficient training, but they have the knowledge and skills to work on your spreadsheets without having to ask many questions or maybe cause problems with that spreadsheet. Number 3, identify your audience. Ensure that the design is appropriate for your audience and it's as clean and simple as possible to understand. It's really important when you're putting together a spreadsheet to think about who's going to be looking at this spreadsheet. Is it just going to be internal? Is it just your team colleagues? Is it your manager? Or is it going to a client or up to stakeholders? Maybe it's a personal project that you're working on. Maybe you're putting together something for your after-school club, and so therefore have a little bit more leeway on how professional that spreadsheet needs to look. So think about whose eyes are going to be on this spreadsheet and design accordingly. For example, if this is a professional business spreadsheet that's going to go to clients, you're probably not going to want to use something like Comic Sans font. You also might not want to add any images that appear too cartoony or colors that are very lurid. So think about your audience prior to starting out with the design. Number 5, include a welcome sheet with instruction. It's always good to provide a welcome sheet with your Excel spreadsheet, which has instructions on how to use the spreadsheet. And this is really something that I don't tend to see a lot of people do, but it can be so helpful, particularly if you're sharing this workbook with lots of people. Simply having a worksheet at the beginning called How to Use can offer valuable instructions so people aren't confused as to how to use the worksheet and where they need to input their information. It might provide some guidance as to where that user needs to enter their data or what they need to do. And you can add things onto this sheet such as keys or legends. So if you have lots of formatting in your spreadsheet, let other people know what that formatting means. You might want to give some guidance about where this worksheet needs to be saved once they've made changes. Or you might even want to go a stage further and have a versions worksheet that people update once they've made changes. All of this type of information is so useful when you're sharing your workbooks with other people and really cuts down the amount of questions that you're being asked. Number 6, separate your data. Make sure that you have your source data, your calculations, and your analysis on separate worksheets to avoid confusion. Excel is one of the best tools out there when it comes to analyzing data. So if you have a whole bunch of sales data like I have just here, you want to ensure that you have your raw data source, your sales data, on one worksheet, but any calculations you perform based off of this data, you want to keep those separate on a different worksheet. If I'd put these on the same worksheet as the source data, things can start to get really confusing, and it really doesn't assist with readability for other people. I would also then put my analysis of that data on another worksheet entirely. So my analysis might be something like taking that source data and creating a pivot table or creating some kind of chart. So don't try and cram all of these different things, your source data, your calculations, and your analysis onto one worksheet. Separate everything out. Design for longevity. Make sure that you future-proof your spreadsheet and allow for future changes. Now, this is a really important one. As I said at the beginning, we tend to just put our data into a worksheet, and sometimes we don't really think about having to use that worksheet in 6 months or a year's time, particularly when it's been circulated around numerous people. So make sure you think about using things like Excel tables, which is going to make updating your data a lot quicker and easier. And the golden rule here, never hard code values into your formulas. For example, if we take a look at this tax column, I'm currently clicked on cell I6. I have a formula here which is just multiplying the sales value in cell H6 with the sales tax. Now, instead of typing in or hard coding the number 15% into this formula, I've used a cell reference. So if this sales tax changes in 6 months' time to 20%, it means that I'm not having to go into the formula and change 15 to 20 in everything in this tax column. I can simply change it in one cell and all of the formulas will automatically update. So don't hard code numbers into your cells and think about using things like tables. Use a consistent, clear structure. So think about color coding your worksheets and use cell styles to identify input, output, and calculation cells. It's good to get into the habit, particularly when you're working on larger workbooks that have lots and lots of different worksheets, of color coding those worksheets. So worksheets that contain related data or similar data make the tabs all one color. For example, if you take a look at my tabs in this workbook, you can see that the 3 that are in green are all kind of related to each other. So it's a really good visual indicator of which worksheets are related to other worksheets. Another thing that can be really helpful is to use something called cell styles. And we're actually going to talk more about this in the first lesson. But what cell styles do are basically let the user know which cells are input cells, i.e. which ones they can change, which ones contain calculations, which ones contain a heading, which ones contain warnings, so on and so forth. And once you have cell styles in your workbook, you can then add those into the legend on that welcome sheet so that people understand exactly what each of these formatted cells mean. Another thing that really assists with keeping your spreadsheets looking clean and clear is by removing the grid lines. You can see on all of my worksheets, I don't have the Excel grid lines showing. I have a really nice clean white background, which really allows the focus to be entirely on the data. And finally, a really important golden rule: control data input. So keep worksheets error-free using data validation and protection. If you're sharing your workbook with lots of other people, as I mentioned at the beginning, the more people who have access to your workbook, the more likely it is that somebody's going to change something that's going to cause an error. And you really don't want to be spending a lot of time putting together a really nice worksheet with lots of whizzy formulas in it, only to have someone break the formula the first time they use it. So we can help with that by controlling access to certain parts of our worksheet. For example, you could think about using things like data validation drop-down lists to control exactly what users are entering into the cells. With this drop-down list just here, nobody can free type into that cell. They are forced to select one of the options that I've set up in this drop-down list. It also might be that you want to add protection to the worksheet or even the entire workbook, so that people can't edit specific cells. So if you have a cell that contains a formula like this one just here, if I don't want anybody changing what this formula says, I can choose to protect this cell, but keep everything else unprotected so they can do things like select manager names. They simply can't edit the formula. Notice if I try and edit anything, I'm getting a message pop up because I've applied protection. So there's lots of things we can do in Excel to control the data that's going into our spreadsheet to keep them as error-free as possible. So those are my golden rules when it comes to designing spreadsheets. Have a little think about your work and how you might adopt some of these approaches. One of the tools available in Excel that you can use to improve readability and make your spreadsheets more user-friendly are cell styles. And I always find that cell styles seem to be often overlooked by people. Essentially what cell styles are preset formatting. And you can use this formatting as a visual way to indicate things like which cells contain formulas and which cells can be edited, which cells contain warning messages, notes, so on and so forth. And all of the formatting can be customized so you can choose your own colors. So let's take a look at how this works. So my data set here is just an invoice spreadsheet for some clients. So I've got some invoice numbers, some invoice dates. We can see the amount of each invoice. And then the final two columns, VAT and total, these columns actually contain a formula. So you can see that this value is calculated by multiplying the amount by the VAT percentage in cell K3. And then the total is a simple sum calculation of the amount plus the VAT. So maybe in this spreadsheet, I want to let people know in a visual way that the cells in these two columns contain formulas and shouldn't really be edited. Now, one point to note here is that cell styles don't do anything like lock cells or prevent people from editing. They're just a visual indicator. And I'm going to show you in a moment why it's always best to add some kind of legend so that people know exactly what all the different colors mean. But when it comes to applying cell styles, this is so simple. Check this out. So we're going to press Ctrl-Shift down arrow to select both of these columns. And on the Home tab in the Styles group, we're going to click the Cell Styles drop-down. And you can see we have lots of different cell styles in here. As I said, these don't have any functionality, so to speak. They're just simply formatting. And the colors you see in here, particularly for that group themed cell styles at the bottom, those are being picked up from whatever theme you have set. So I'm using the standard office theme, so I'm getting the standard office colors. Now, I want to denote these as cells that contain calculations or formulas. So notice in the data and model group, we have a cell style called calculation. So I could go in and I could just apply this style, no problem. However, if you look at this and think, I actually really don't like the formatting, I don't like that orange font, and I don't like the shading, you can, of course, modify any of these cell styles. Now, I don't recommend that you right-click and modify the cell styles that are already here. What I would say to you is always make a duplicate of the cell style and then modify it to create your own custom style. So let's go for duplicate. We can give our style a name. I'm going to call it formulas, so it's a little bit different. And then I'm going to click on format, and we can customize how we want this to look. So maybe I want the font to be, let's go for just a darker blue. Let's go for a border. Now I'm going to let's put a dark blue border around the outside as well. And then finally, I'm going to add some background shading. Let's just add a light blue background. Click on OK and OK again. And now when we go to cell styles, you can see we have a new group at the top called custom, and that contains our new custom cell style. So I can apply this and check it out. Now notice what it's done here. It's removed the accounting number format from the style. So what I would do is go back in, right click, I can modify my cell style, click on format, go to the number tab and make sure that I also set that number formatting for this particular style. So many different ways that you can modify these. What I'd then probably do is go in and denote these cells as cells that people can change, input cells, because people are going to be adding new invoices all the time. So let's select all of these, go to cell styles, and there we have an input cell style. Now, once again, I could keep this with that formatting, or I could change it to something else. So let's duplicate this one. I'm going to call this inputs with an S on the end. And let's change this so that we have let's go for a bright red border around the outside. And I think I'm going to make that slightly wider actually. And I'm just going to make the font just black. And the final thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to jump across to the fill tab and we're going to say no color. So let's click on OK and OK again. And now we can apply the cell style. So notice it's now been added to the custom group at the top. There it is, inputs. We can click to select. Now notice one important thing. Because I didn't define any number formatting within my cell style when I modified it, notice that the invoice date column is now just showing as numbers and the amount column has also lost its formatting. So it's entirely up to you if you want to include formatting in your cell style, but if I'd included, let's say, currency formatting, it means that it's going to format any numbers. So that would include the invoice date column. So this column would also end up formatted as currency or accounting format. So what I prefer to do is just get the bare bones there, and then we can come back in and we can simply apply the relevant formatting. So I'm going to select the invoice date column and let's make sure that's set to short date, and the amount column, I'm going to change that to accounting formatting with 2 decimal places. Now the cool thing about cell styles is that if we have our data in a table, when we go to the bottom and add a new invoice, let's just add IMV 0025. And let's just add another date in here and we'll say Computech and we'll just add a value. Notice that the table auto expands to accommodate that new record and the cell style carries through. We don't have to do anything extra to apply that cell style. Now, a final couple of things I would probably do here. I would also make the VAT cell, this cell just here, an input cell, because the VAT might change at some point. So I want to let people know that they can actually modify this cell. So once again, we're going to go to cell styles. Let's choose inputs. So I would simply add percentage formatting just to put that back. Now remember, when it comes to cell styles, we have lots of other styles in here as well. For example, things like titles and headings. So what I could do here with the spreadsheet title is I could select this cell, which includes all of this text, go to cell styles and maybe choose title style, just to give it a bit of structure. And of course, something that's really important is adding a legend or a key so that everybody knows what these cell styles mean. Now, normally I would add the legend or the key onto a summary sheet, and we are going to talk about that in the following lessons. But just to give you an idea, what I would do somewhere is I would select a cell, I would add the formulas cell style, select the cell underneath, add the inputs, and then I would just write some text so everybody knows what these colors mean. So there we go, calculation cell do not edit, input cell can be edited. So that is how you can use cell styles to improve the readability of your spreadsheets. When working in Excel, and particularly if you're going to be sharing your spreadsheets with colleagues or other people, it's really important that you control the data that goes into the spreadsheet. And we're going to explore a couple of methods that we can use to ensure that our spreadsheets remain as error-free as possible. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you take a look at this spreadsheet just here, we have a list of employees. And in here, we can see their department and their salary. Now, if I share this spreadsheet with, let's say, 10 other people, anybody can go into this spreadsheet and start making changes to these cells. Now, that might be fine. This might be a list that you want people to keep updated, but there might be certain cells or certain parts of this worksheet that you just don't want them to touch. For example, if you take a look in column I, you can see we have a couple of NA errors in here. Now, don't worry about those too much at the moment. If we click on one of these cells, you can see that it contains an index match formula. And again, if you're not sure what an index match formula is, we're going to cover that in a couple of sections' time. All you really need to note now is that these two cells both contain formulas. Now, what I don't want to happen here is that when I send this spreadsheet to somebody else, they come into one of these cells and change this formula. Because it might be that the person who's changing it doesn't have particularly good Excel skills and they break the formula. Or it might be that they accidentally touch their keyboard, drop something on their keyboard, add something into the formula, and then again it's broken. So we want to make sure that we put in as many controls as possible to ensure that things like this don't happen. Now, what we're aiming for here is in cell I3, I want to be able to type in an employee name and have it return the department and the salary. And that is basically what these index match formulas are going to do. They basically look at the name that we have in cell I3. They then look in the table, they find that name, let's say Lee Anderson, for example, and they'll return the department and the salary for that employee. So let's type in Lee Anderson just here. And when I hit enter, we should find that it returns the department that he's in and the salary because of these formulas. Now, I can see that the salary doesn't have any formatting, so let's fix that. Let's apply some accounting formatting with 2 decimal places. So that's working fine, but what if I come in here and I type in, let's go for Laurie May, and hit enter? I'm getting NA errors. Now, Laurie May does exist in the table, so why are these formulas not returning the department and the salary? Well, if I take a look at my employee name, I can see here is Laurie May, but notice that I've spelt her name wrong. So instead of an I on the end, I've used a Y. So if you have a spelling mistake in your lookup, it's not going to return the correct result. And this can reflect really badly on you, because if you go back to your manager and say, well, Laurie May doesn't exist in the table according to my formulas, when they're actually there, then that isn't really a good look. So the method that I would use to ensure that people are inputting the correct names every single time is to use a data validation drop-down list. So what we're going to do here is let's just add employee at the top. Make this a bit wider, and I'm just going to use my format painter to copy that formatting because we're going to add a little data validation drop down. So let's go to the data tab, over to data tools. We're going to choose data validation, and on the settings tab, we're going to say that we want to create a list. Now, the source for our list, well, we want to list all of the employee names. So I'm going to go to the first name in the employee name column, Control-Shift down arrow to select the entire range and click on OK. So now I have this little drop down and I can select the names and it's correct every single time. So this really safeguards against spelling mistakes and people just entering in the wrong thing into the cell. So consider utilizing data validation lists. Now, the second thing that I'd like to show you in this lesson is how to protect individual cells. Because now we have our nice data validation drop down, our formulas underneath are working perfectly. Now, what about if I want to send this spreadsheet to other people? I want them to be able to edit the employee details down here and add new employees onto the bottom. I also want them to be able to make selections from this drop down, but I don't want them to be able to click in either of these two cells and start changing the formula. So what I can do here is I can protect these two cells that contain those formulas and leave everything else unprotected. Now, protection, I always think works a little bit backwards. And the principle you need to get your head around is that every cell in Excel by default is locked. Now, you might be thinking, well, if every cell is locked, how can I just type into any cell? And if you don't believe me, let's right-click on a cell. Let's go to Format Cells and the Protection tab. Notice the locked checkbox is selected. And you'll find that no matter what cell you click in your spreadsheet. Now, the reason why we can still type into locked cells is that this locking doesn't take effect until we protect the worksheet. So until then, everything is still unlocked. So if we want to make certain cells editable and other ones locked, what I would do here is I would select all of the cells that I want people to be able to change. So I'm going to say Control-Shift down arrow. I also want them to be able to use that drop down. Then I'm going to right-click, go to Format Cells, and we're going to unlock those cells. Let's click on OK. So now when I go up to the Review tab, I'm going to say Protect Sheet. I'm not going to use a password. Let's click on OK. And now what we'll find is that these cells are still editable. So if I go down here, I could change this to Sales, not a problem. But if I try and make any changes to these two cells where we have the formulas, I'm going to get an error message. It says the cell or chart you're trying to change is on a protected sheet. So these two cells are protected or locked, and everything else where I need to make changes, all of those cells are editable. Working quickly and efficiently in Excel is the name of the game, and that is extended to being able to navigate quickly around our workbook. And that's particularly important if you have a workbook that has lots and lots of different worksheets. For example, this workbook that I have here has quite a few different worksheets, and I want to be able to jump around between these worksheets in the most efficient way possible. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you a few different methods when it comes to navigating and some cool little things that you can add into your spreadsheet to make it really easy for yourself and anybody that you share this workbook with to get to the worksheet that they need quickly. Now, the simplest way of jumping to another worksheet is to come all the way down to where we have our tabs. Can you see these two arrows in the left-hand corner? If you hover your mouse over any of these arrows and right-click, notice that we get this little menu pop up, which lists out all of the worksheets in our workbook. So if I want to quickly jump to the Analysis worksheet, I can select Analysis, click on OK, and it's going to take me there. So that's a really useful little quick tip. But how else can we navigate between workbooks? Well, we could add a hyperlink to certain pages. So let's go to the Sales Data worksheet. Maybe I want people to be able to very quickly jump across to the Analysis worksheet from this Sales Data worksheet. So what I could do is I could add a link. Now I'm going to add another row into the top here because I'm going to put my link just here. So I'm going to say go to the Analysis worksheet, and I'm going to make this a hyperlink. So with this text selected, I can either right-click and go down to Link. Alternatively, I can press the keyboard shortcut Control-K, which is going to jump me to the Insert Hyperlink dialog box. Now, there's lots of things that we can link to from within here. We can link to external websites. We can link to email addresses. We can link to other workbooks, or we can link to other worksheets within the same workbook. Now, to do that, we need to go to Place in this document. And this is where you'll then see all of the other worksheets listed out. So I want this to go to the Analysis worksheet, so let's make sure we select it. And notice just above, we can also type in the exact cell reference that we want to jump to on that Analysis workbook. So by default, it's going to be cell A1, which a lot of the time will be perfect. Just so you can see, let's change this to A10. We can also add a screen tip in here so that when people hover their mouse over this hyperlink, it basically tells them what they need to do. So we can put instructional text in here. So click here to see the Sales Analysis report. Let's click on OK. So you can see that that's now a hyperlink. And again, if I hover my mouse over it, I'm getting that little screen tip. Click here to see the Sales Analysis report. And if I click on this, it's going to jump us across to the Sales Analysis worksheet. And notice where my cursor is. It's in cell A10. So that is a really nice, simple way to navigate. Now, what else could we do to make these links more interesting? Well, we could hyperlink from a picture or an icon or a shape. We could create our own button. So instead of having a text link, maybe I want to make myself a little interesting button. So let's go to Insert. We're going to go to Shapes, and I'm going to draw a rounded rectangle. And here I'm going to say, see the analysis report. So then we can format. So I'm going to change this to Aptos font. I'm going to put it in the center. Let's make it a little bit smaller. And in fact, I'm going to make that a little bit wider. And then we can change the button color to match our color scheme. So let's go for a green background fill. And I think I'm going to go for a dark green shape outline. So now I have a useful little button instead, and I can put this wherever I need to put it. So maybe I want to put it at the bottom here, and then I can run through the same process. So Control K, I can select the analysis worksheet. I can select the cell I want to link to and add a screen tip if I want to. Click on OK, and now this becomes a helpful little button, which is going to jump us to the same worksheet. Now, you're not limited to linking from text and shapes. You can also use pictures and icons. So let's take a look at one more example. I'm going to insert an icon, and I'm going to search for an icon of a house or a home. So let's just choose this one just here and click on Insert. Now, with these icons, you can change the color of them from the graphics format tab. So again, I could make this the green color. I want this to stand out a little bit. So let's make it purple. I'm going to make it a bit smaller. And then what I could do is I could place this somewhere on the worksheet and maybe link this to the first worksheet, the home worksheet, for example. And this is something that I quite like to do because a lot of the time, the first worksheet in the workbook will contain a lot of useful information. So it's good to have a way that people can quickly jump back to home if they need to. Now I'm just going to put mine, let's just put it up here. Now I could copy and paste this onto every single worksheet so that we have some consistency and can easily jump back to the home page whenever we need to. But with regards to linking, this works in exactly the same way. We can press Control K, and this time I'm going to select How to Use, click on OK, and now if we click on this, it's going to jump us back to that first page. So those are a few different methods that you could employ to help your users navigate around a large workbook. In this very quick lesson, we're just going to talk about summary sheets and why you should be adding them into your Excel workbooks. So what exactly is a summary sheet? Well, a summary sheet in general is a worksheet that appears at the beginning of a workbook. So you can see here that I have a workbook open. This workbook contains many different tabs with different types of data on each tab. And what I've done here is I've added a summary sheet to the beginning of the workbook. So if you take a look at my tabs at the bottom, you can see I've added this one here that says How to Use. Now, the idea of a summary sheet is that anybody looking at this workbook or trying to interpret this workbook, it just gives them a little bit more information about exactly how to use the workbook. So I've labeled the tab How to Use, and on it, I've just listed out some important information. So you can see at the top here, we have a little table of data with some instructions. So it goes through some of the tabs and lets them know exactly what they need to do on each tab. For example, with the Calculations tab, it says perform any calculations on the Calculations tab. So if we go across to Calculations, they know that they need to perform any calculations for this workbook on this specific tab. With the Dashboard tab, it says refresh the dashboard weekly to update data. Filter data using the slicers only. So it just lets people know exactly what they should be doing on each tab. Then we move down to cell styles. Now, we looked at cell styles in a previous lesson. These allow us to color code different cells, again, to guide people so that they know what type of information should be going into those cells. And I mentioned in that lesson that it is important to have a key or a legend letting people know what those cell styles mean. And this is in general a good place to put it. So we put it on the summary sheet so people know that any cell that is colored in orange is an input cell. Anything that's gray with orange font is calculation. so on and so forth. And we've also got a bit more information at the bottom here with regards to saving. So it says, if you amend this spreadsheet, save it as a new version in this folder. So again, it prevents people from naming files incorrectly, and it ensures that they know exactly where they need to be storing any new versions that they create of this workbook. And then finally at the bottom we have versions. So update the versions tab whenever a change is made, add your initials, the date, and the details of the change. And that's pretty much all there is to a summary worksheet. You can put whatever you like on the summary worksheet. Any information that you think is going to be helpful to people will prevent errors from going into the cells and will just make your workbook in general easier to read and interpret. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how you can make your data input a lot quicker by using forms in Excel. So what exactly do I mean by this? Well, if you take a look at the worksheet, we just have a small data set just here that lists out some invoice data. So in column B, we have the invoice date. We then have an invoice number, the client that the invoice belongs to, the amount on the invoice, and the status, so whether it's late or if it's been paid. Now, it might be that it's my job each week to update this invoice list. So as we send out new invoices, I want to add more invoices to the bottom just here. Now, I could, of course, just go to the bottom cell and start to type in the record, or I could use a form. And sometimes using a form makes this entire process a lot quicker because it allows you to move between records efficiently. It allows you to add new records really quickly, and you can also delete records super fast as well. Now, if you're hunting around on any of these ribbons up here looking for the Forms button, then unfortunately you're not going to find it, because forms isn't a command that's on a ribbon by default. So we need to add it. And the easiest way to do this is to add it to the quick access toolbar. So if we go to our QAT, click the drop down just here to open up the customize menu, and we're going to go straight down to more commands. This is going to jump us across to Excel options and to the quick access toolbar page. Now from here, we can choose how we want to sort our commands. So currently I'm only showing popular commands in the list below. Now, in general, I tend to switch this to all commands so that I know that I'm seeing everything that's available to me. And these commands are organized alphabetically, which makes it a little bit easier to find. So we're looking for the forms command. So I'm going to scroll down to where we have all of our Fs, and there it is, just there, form. Let's select it, and we're going to click add to add it to our QAT. When we click on OK, we should see it now sitting up here. Now, before we click on this form button, I would always advise you to put your data into an Excel table. So let's press Control T. Yes, my table has headers. Let's click on OK, and you can see I'm getting the default formatting. Now, you can change that from the table styles dropdown if you want to. This isn't a necessary step. You can just leave it as it is. But in general, I usually change the default. I'm going to change it to this one just here, dark green, table style, medium 18. And of course, then if you go to the table design ribbon in table style options, you have some choices with regards to if you want banded rows turned off or on. Now, I have mine turned on currently. If I deselect this checkbox, it's going to turn those banded rows off. Now, why do we use banded rows? Well, a lot of the time it makes it a lot easier to read across the record. So I'm going to leave mine on. So we've got our data in a table. We have our forms button ready to go. Let's use it. So let's click on it and check out what happens. We get this useful little form which has picked up all of the column headings in our data set, and we can see them listed out here. We also then have a group of commands that we can use. So if I wanted to enter a new invoice to the bottom here, I can simply click the new button and I can type in the invoice date. So let's go for 1/15/2024. Invoice number is IMV-1028. Tab. Client is client 15. Tab, let's say the amount is $200, and the status will say that that is late. And you can see as soon as we click on the new button, it adds that new record into the table. It also leaves the form dialog box open, so you can then just quickly jump to the next one and add another new record if you want to. And that's really all there is to using forms to input data. As I said, this can make your data entry a lot quicker, and it's a great efficiency tip to know. It's time now to complete exercise 2. And in this exercise, we're going to practice some of the skills that we've learnt in this section of the course. Now, notice here that I have a table of data that lists out some product IDs, the product name, the price of each product. We have a blank sales tax column, and then we have the status of the product, so whether it's in stock or out of stock. Also notice in cell H1, we have a sales tax amount of 20%. Now, the first thing I'd like you to do is format this dataset as an Excel table. I'd then like you to calculate the sales tax for each product in column E. I'd then like you to indicate that columns B, C, D, and F are input cells. And then I'd like you to add the Forms button to the Quick Access toolbar and use that Forms button to add another record to the bottom of the dataset. And you can see the details of the record that I'd like you to add. And what you should find is that if you've done all of this correctly, the sales tax field will automatically update. That's it for now. I will see you in the next section.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see the full course that this video came from, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Sez IT.